and we will then kind of close with Q&A and fellowship at the end. So first, let's introduce Reverend Frontz. Pronouns are she, her. Reverend Frontz is a UCC minister and the community and spiritual leader of Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis. And just announced, Reverend Frontz will be the new seminary chaplain for United Theological Seminary come this May. So very, very warm welcome to Reverend Frontz, not only to this event, but also to our United community. And then also on our panel is Reverend Lawrence Tanner Richardson. Pronouns are he, him. Reverend Richardson is of Farmington, Michigan, and he is the senior pastor of Salem United Church of Christ. He's also a doctoral candidate at Berkeley School of Theology and is the author of the text, I Know What Heaven Looks Like. His work appears in Huffington Post Religion, The Root, Believe Out Loud, the SALT Collective, and numerous national and international publications. Next is Reverend Gina Harvey, pronouns she, her, of Boulder, Colorado. And Reverend Harvey is a chaplain at the University of Colorado Hospital in Aurora and is an ordained United Church of Christ minister serving as the pastoral team, on the pastoral team at Mayflower Congregational Church in Englewood, Colorado. Reverend Harvey is in the certification process to become an ACPE certified educator and currently works with cohorts of chaplain student interns. She has a keen interest in bioethics and educating families on advanced directives and end-of-life choices. So welcome. And last but definitely not least is Reverend Tory Moir. Pronouns are they, them. Reverend Moir is of Boulder, Colorado, and is a hospital chaplain and an Episcopal priest who is passionate about changing the conversation around death, medical decision-making, and other topics that we often avoid talking about. So welcome. Welcome to each of you, and I am so glad that you are here. And so before we get started on our panel conversation, I will turn it back to Nikki, who will offer an invitation around artistic expression during our time together and who will share about our hopes for this event.
Oh, thank you. I'm playing with the spotlight, so you're going to see all kinds of random things. So, okay. Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. And I'm so honored and yeah, I guess I am excited. It's a wonky way to feel excited, but yeah, excited of around having such a meaningful conversation and a meaningful way for us to talk about, things that are hard to talk about and to be able to gather and collect our thoughts. And the hope is for us to be able to take this information that we receive and take this experience and be able to duplicate it in a way of by getting our last wishes in place and encouraging, others, not only in our circle, but also us as practitioners to be able to, the hope is to be able to more comfortably be able to help others get their affairs in order. So as far as an artistic expression, an artistic way of being, I want you all to think about legacy. Think about legacy in the sense of story, of what story would you hope that would be told about you? And think about, what parts of the story, why is that important to you? What is that thing that you want to continue to leave on when you and I and, whoever else is long, long gone? What is that thing you want to leave in the world? What is that essence? What is that hope? What is that way of being that you want to continue to cultivate throughout your life and throughout your ministry and your intention right now so that it lives on generations upon generations? So that, my friend, is what you're invited to consider to maybe write as a journal prompt. You're invited to get paper, You're invited to get coloring utensils, if that's crayons, if that's colored pencils, if that's paint. And you're invited to artistically express what is going to be your legacy. What is your legacy? And how and why is that important? How and why is that important? And so you're invited to intentionally create this artistic expression throughout our time today with our conversation. And there will also be a 10 to 15 minute pause before we transition to breakout rooms, where you'll also be able to create and continue to cultivate this expression. So that's my invitation to you. And it's an invitation. It's an invitation. It's not an expectation. This is something that is hopefully meaningful for you. And it's something, a visual artistic representation of your values and what matters to you and what you want your story to be. So that is the invitation. And it's vague and broad on purpose. So for those that want more details, this is the invitation for you to critically and creatively think about an act of what is meaningful for you. So there's that part. And I want to go into the hope. So in my experience as a hospital chaplain, particularly in Colorado and at trauma hospitals, where I'm meeting folks on the worst day of their life. Maybe it's a skiing accident. Maybe it's, taking a really, really deep fall, all kinds of just horrific situations. And at these situations, not only just the patient that's in the bed, but it's also the family where they are faced with what is their theology around death and dying, and what is the practical things in place around death and dying. And surprisingly, more and more in my experience, learning that a lot of people have not even talked about this. And so I remember it's like, why aren't the churches talking about this? Why aren't the seminaries talking about this as much as, I don't know. But more so the churches, because these are, folks that are not necessarily seminary trained or anything like that. And so thus thinking about that and working with a lot of, my close personal friends in the ministry field, it was like, well, why don't we just create something? Instead of talk about what's not here, let's make it happen. And thus, Jessica believing in us, United believing in us and believing how valued and important this is for not only the United community, but the wider church community. Thus, here we are. So my friends, let's get to it.
Great. Thanks, Nikki. I will spotlight our panelists. And just get started. So, of course, there will be a time for everyone to ask questions at the end, but we have some questions that we thought might be a really helpful conversation starter for our time, beginning with, why does the conversation of death and dying, or around death and dying, matter to you? I think Nikki kind of started us off on why it's important to her, but curious for others, why is the conversation on death and dying important for you?
I guess, do we have an order? Draw straws, I guess. I don't know.
I certainly can begin, break the ice, if that's all right. I'm Reverend Lawrence Richardson. I'm the senior pastor at Salem United Church of Christ in Farmington, Michigan. And this topic is really important to me for a number of reasons, most specifically as a pastor, especially given the dynamics of, all of our churches. I have a large aging population, and we're all going to die eventually. And a part of my ministry is wanting to ensure that we provide services and support for the whole of one's life. And so if we're going to be so intentional with for example, with a baptism, we should be just as intentional with planning for someone's end of life care and ideas and what happens with their affairs. And I just think of it as a ministry. And I think that we're all supposed to be good stewards of what we've been given. And so it's important for me to be able to practice what I preach and also apply those same kinds of thoughtful, intentional stewardship practices to my own life and my own legacy and resources. And so it really is important for a number of reasons, but most specifically because I serve, an aging group, and also legacy is important for all of us.
Thanks, Lawrence, especially kind of renaming that notion of legacy that Nikki started us off with. Appreciate that. Others, Tory or Gina?
I might just piggyback on this. This is Gina. My primary role is working as a chaplain and as a person who educates chaplains. And I do also work in a congregation. And I think I would just affirm everything that you just said, Lawrence, and then just maybe think about grief and how when we don't think about death, and death comes as something that's so jarring to our being, to our families, to our churches, to our communities, grief can become really life-altering and unmanageable. The new DSM-5 actually added a prolonged grief disorder diagnosis. We don't grieve well. We don't grieve well in America in particular. And I feel personally a lot of that has to do with our fear and avoidance of the idea of death and our resistance to seeing death as something that is inevitable and natural. So I would just like to lift up that too. That's, if we're gonna live well, we need to learn to grieve well. And that includes broadening our understanding of our humanity as finite and embracing whatever spirituality or meaning making helps us. But it's important, for me, it's really important to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, so yeah, this is Tory. And like it said in my bio, I'm a hospital chaplain, but I like the rest of my colleagues have also worked in the parish in a church. And I also have a personal element, which is that I've been experiencing, my grandmother is dying. She's terminally ill. And the experience of watching, so I have two sides of my family, which are very culturally different in terms of how they discuss difficult things. One side, they just lay it all out there. They talk about addiction and mental illness, and they talk about divorce, and they talk about death, and they talk about physical illness. And it's just like, and their resilience around these things is really high. And then this other side of the family, which is currently experiencing this really difficult loss, does not do that well. They avoid talking about anything that they feel is unpleasant, which includes death. And so when my grandmother was diagnosed with a terminal illness and entered hospice care, everybody in my immediate family, or my extended family, basically besides myself, was just shocked. Like they were totally blindsided, even though she's been really sick for a long time. And this thing that she's dying of is like a hereditary thing that both her parents died from. Like, this is the kind of thing that if you were attending to it, it would still be a shock, because it's always a shock when you know someone that you love is dying, even if you feel like you've prepared yourself. It wouldn't need to have been this shocking though. And I share this just because this is one of these things as a practitioner, you can talk to families all the time and your own family might not listen to you. And so, this is also, as a trans and queer person, other panelists can probably speak to this too. A lot of facts about my existence have also been at points and are currently being legislated about, whether they're appropriate to speak of. And so my experience as like a human being is just being like, oh, that thing you don't want to talk about, we should probably talk about that. And it's important to me because every time that I've had an opportunity to just like have honest conversations with people about these kinds of things that they don't want to talk about, what I've experienced is greater resilience and deeper relationship with whoever that is. And so, you know, I think that whether it's your pastoral relationship or whether it's in your personal relationship or whether it's a patient you're supporting in a chaplain context, our ability to model these kinds of conversations and our ability to show up for them in a way that is able to like create the container for others to show up to, even if it's really uncomfortable for them, can be of immense benefit. So that's why that's important. This is important to me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think you really touch on a really important factor of kind of our own personal identities really and cultural identities really leading into why it's important for us individually to talk about death and dying and why it's an important topic. I think with that, I'm curious, we have a pastor and chaplains, and what is your role then specifically in supporting others in death, dying, and bereavement?
So right now I am a licensed local pastor in the United Methodist Church. I'm also a student at United Seminary of the Twin Cities and also in CPE. So these three different roles are certainly unique in this. Not only have I dealt with death with other people grieving, but it's been difficult grieving loss myself. So in a lot of ways, one thing that I feel very convinced in is the idea of death with dignity and the idea that comes from allowing people to have that ability and opportunity. And as a pastor in the future, I've recognized that speaking about that in certain spaces is not a good idea, but in some spaces it can be, because seeing people that are struggling with so much difficulty with terminal illness and cancer and all of those things just sitting in a hospital bed is just really a difficult thing.
Thank you so much, Calvin, for sharing.
I'm curious, any other responses from our panelists or kind of how you can name your role in supporting others in death and dying?
So for myself as a pastor, there are a few different things that we can do. So while a person is perhaps in good health and of sound mind, you know, we give opportunities for conversations to be had about what kind of end of life arrangements, whether they want a funeral or a memorial service, and what kinds of service they want, what kinds of music, that sort of thing. And then also we have really practical conversations in terms of how we steward our resources and what kinds of planned giving we can also engage. And so we have conversations about making planned gifts and also conversations about legacy gifts. There's a number of, ways that a person can leave funds to a congregation, perhaps through an endowment, or we have, for example, the United Church Funds. They have workshops that we engage together. I find it important to always be alongside when they're engaging in those sorts of trainings, so that if they have questions, they feel like they have a support person there. But then also after, when a person is not alive, just being there for family to really meet with in their time of crisis. A lot of times people, death is unexpected. It's not something that people can, get out ahead of. And oftentimes we have family members that they don't know what to do or where to begin, and they haven't had these conversations before, and so they don't even have a clue what to do when somebody dies. And so we will sometimes be the first call, and that sometimes is really just helping to plan, what happens with the body, what happens with belongings, how to engage certain family dynamics, grief. And we have this practice at our church, and I'll end with this because, I want to give others space as well. But we have this practice at our church where when someone passes away, we have a team that will provide meals or gift cards. And then every 6 to 8 weeks, they'll receive a letter from me and, a booklet, a journal, a gift from the church, just to know that, we are thinking of them and that we are praying for and with them. But, it's always evolving, especially in the time of COVID and with, how we're seeing population shifts happen. But those are the current things that I do in my role for folks as it pertains to death and dying.
You can go ahead, Gina.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking as both of the people that responded, Lawrence, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the participant who responded, and thinking about how our different roles in ministry lead us to do different things in these situations. And when I'm in a pastoral role, I might do kind of teaching or affirming the faith of the congregation I'm leading, reminding people of what their faith means to them in the context of us being in a church family together. And it's very different in the role of chaplaincy. One of my chaplain students had this great metaphor of he sees himself as like a person on the beach with a metal detector, and he's looking for resources that are under the surface that he's discovering. They're not his, he's discovering them. And I really love that metaphor. And I think in chaplaincy, we're there to discover resources. We're there to discover experiences and stories, and then help the folks we're working with make meaning that's their own meaning. And it might be something completely different than mine. It likely is. And sometimes it's things that I don't necessarily agree with, but agreeing with something and affirming something are really different. And the question in the chat about struggling with people to kind of engage in their emotional experience. And I think in chaplaincy, we learn to honor that and come alongside that. And sometimes I recognize that might be out of self-protection, out of a role they have in the family, their own identity. And as a chaplain, I might be with that person for just such a short time. And it's not my job to kind of dismantle those things. As a pastor, I might have more opportunities to come alongside and encourage the deeper work that goes on. So it can feel kind of contradictory, but I think it's a beautiful tension that we can hold, those of us who are in a couple different roles in ministry.
Yeah, I think it really depends vocationally on what you're doing. Because as a priest, it is my job to administer the sacraments of the denomination which I'm ordained, the Episcopal Church, and to shape people in their the theologies that, you know, to a certain extent at least, that we have in our, sorry, my video just turned off, didn't it? My apologies. Can people hear me?
Yes,
okay,
we can.
Great. Nikki, it says the host has disabled my video, so
I didn't do it.
I don't know, man.
Keep talking, we'll work on it.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna get, y'all know what my face looks like. Anyway, so it would be my job to kind of, to a certain extent at least, guide people in that specific theological framework. Whereas as a chaplain, that's absolutely not my role at all. And like Gina said, you're coming alongside somebody and you're kind of a detective about, like, oh, what does this person have that might be of use to them in this time? And, you know, occasionally you can offer something for someone if that feels appropriate, but that's so rare for me. I rarely offer anything to anybody that has, yay, this is my case, that hasn't, that, you know, that I usually just affirm whatever they already have going on, or I kind of guide them to, like, reflect on, like, oh, what resource do I have? In my job, to be, like, super practical, chaplains in my hospital, chaplains are called for every death. And so even if we may not attend the death, we may not be with the family if the family doesn't ask for us, but we're always called and we're always kind of around. And it is our role to be, like, the point of contact for families figuring out mortuary arrangements and things like that. So, like, we're the people that make sure that a person's remains are taken care of. And sometimes if we're asked, we are allowed or able to offer memorial services for patients who have died in the hospital. So I had one day where like last weekend, where I was on call and was attending to a potential situation in the hospital, but then I also had a funeral for someone who had died in our emergency room. And so, you know, we sometimes meet families and patients before they die, but a lot of the time we're just like, I've never met this person and I have never met their family, and we're kind of coming in, you know, after, especially if it's like the emergency room, if it's a sudden death, like to be able to help families kind of know what to do next is a huge part of our job. And then, which I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but our chaplains are also designated requesters for Donor Alliance. So I'm also somebody who, it's part of my job to go to next of kin and say, your loved one qualifies for tissue donation. Is that something that you think that they would have wanted to do? And explain that to them and facilitate that happening.
Oh, thank you, Tori. That's good. Yeah, so my role, I'm a community and spiritual leader here in Minneapolis. And I look at myself, and I get the greatest compliment by some of my community members of I have a chaplain's heart in that I'm the pastor you call for people that don't have pastors. You know, if there's, you know, not only trauma, but death and there's nobody else to call, I'm the one that you call. You know, working with, you know, folks that may or may not have been a part of my community a decade or so ago that, you know, had nobody else. And so that's, yeah, I look at that as, you know, a very, very important ministry of, you know, being there, you know, just being there and being able to help to partner and guide folks. And looking at, you know, coming on at United, I'm feeling that would be very similar of being able to help, coordinate with, wherever you all are across the country and world, to, make sure that, you are, supported as far as like the spiritual life and spiritual needs of the community. So that's the role that I play. I'm the one that you call when you have no one else to call. So.
So wanting to touch base kind of what on Tory mentioned, so that we can pivot from talking about our role as practitioners and what we do in the field to kind of thinking about what should family members know, what should community members know about death and dying, and any kind of conversation on family dynamics. I know we had a really good comment in the chat around kind of convincing family members around sharing emotional experiences. And so kind of your experience or understanding of family dynamics, and then also talking about maybe some ideas around life care planning that might show up in the family system or in your work with patients or parishioners. I know that was a lot.
I was the one who flagged family systems in the planning. So I think I would like to start just to like get out what I would like to say. I mean, I shared my family's story as an example of this, where when you're a practitioner and you're working with a family and you are attempting to address sort of a gap, like for example, in my job as a chaplain, one of the main things that I do is I go around to people who don't have a medical designated power of attorney form completed and in their chart. And then I ask them if they'd be interested, like if their nurse asks them if they'd be interested in filling one out. And if they say they might, then a chaplain goes to talk to them about it. And when you're doing those kinds of things, or if you have gotten to a place where a patient has declined and you're having to have goals of care conversations with a family, it's really important to recognize the limitations of the system. Like I said, my dad's family that I was sharing about, their capacity to do the kind of work that I would have hoped was just not there. So it's like, I could spend a lot of energy being angry about it, but it's not worth it. And when it's your job, you can't push, like as a chaplain, that's not your role. And, you can kind of try to like massage a situation to like get what needs to happen. But if people are just like not here for some part of a conversation that needs to happen, that's something that's really important to recognize. And then I also would just say, like, when you walk into a patient's room and there's a bunch of family in there, I think it's really a smart strategy to observe the way those people interact, because it's going to change the way people experience the loss, and the way that, people will have these roles in the family system. And, just being cognizant of that. You don't need to make a ton of assumptions right off the bat. That's not your role, but just to be observant of it. Because when you go into a situation cold, like if you're a chaplain, is so common. You just like, you're walking into a room and somebody is dying and you've never met any of these people. And you're like, okay, how do I show up? I think it's important to be aware of kind of those dynamics, because in the nightmares, what I call the nightmare scenario is when someone is in the hospital, unable to make medical decisions. They don't have an appointed power of attorney or medical decision maker. And you have to call a conference of every interested person to find a proxy to make their medical decisions for them, because you need someone to consent to some medical procedure or not. Like, that is the last thing that you want to happen. So Colorado is a proxy state. Not everywhere is a proxy state. In we can talk about this more later. But to be able to look at all of these people, and it's like, who is the MDPOA? Are they owning that role? Are they not? Like, all of these things are so embedded in like the existing patterns of whoever this is. So I think that's why I wanted to talk about it, is just to say, you know, this is a huge impact on the way people experience these things. Yeah, sorry, medical durable power of attorney, MTPOA.
No worries. I'm a teacher, so I'll break it down. In that, in no way, I don't in no way want to insult your intelligence. I'm sure you all know this. And
it's just good to check. Yeah, good for sure.
I'll go next. So the question that I heard was, what should practitioners know? What should community members know? And family dynamics. As a practitioner, you and your embodiedness is a part of the ministry that you are a part of. So your family dynamics and your feelings around death and dying will play out in some way or another. The hope is that with, you know, the, you know, first class education you're getting at United and, you know, your clinical pastoral education is that you're aware of how this is playing out and you can help to mitigate it as best you can and help to pivot it to be productive for the people that you're serving. So that's kind of the hope there. So as a practitioner, you're going to show up. If you're having a bad day, you know, be aware of that and be aware of how that's going to affect how someone is talking to you in a particular way, how that might hit a particular way to you. As a practitioner, you are human. You are human and you get headaches and all the rest of the things. You are not, you know, you're not invincible. And so just knowing that and knowing, okay, it's really important to be self-aware of how you're showing up a particular day, how you, how things affect you. It's important to know that. And also important to develop skills to, again, help to mitigate as much as you can. And one of the things too is balancing out even as a practitioner of also balancing out, again, you're human and you have feelings and you still want those feelings, you know, it's just how to, hey, right now it's the time to, you know, maybe modulate. I'm a musician, so modulate the key to a different key, but maybe play the same melody. So it is, you know, it's a skill set that is continued to be developed. I would be lying to you and tell you I am an expert and I have it all figured out. I learn more and more each and every day. Things that, you know, you should know that you're never prepared, at least initially, for what you walk into. Because you don't know what you're walking into. Even if you read in details, not only the charts from a clinical standpoint, but if you read and have discussions from a parish standpoint with other folks and know the family, you're still not 100% sure what you're walking into. And so being okay with that, that's I think is pretty vital in this business, in this career field, in this life, in this way of being, however you would like to frame it, of coming at it with an open mind and an open eyes of, well, this is what we're doing now. This may relate to what I've experienced before, but it may not. As community members, the reality is, it's important for all of us to ask the questions to the people that are close to us. Actually today is a pretty monumental day. My father-in-law passed away 9 years ago today. So it is very much fresh on our family's mind. just, losing a parent, it's something unimaginable. And so what really started me really, really thinking about this intimately and personally is, losing my mom pretty suddenly too. And so as a community member, I think of like, what would have been helpful at that time for me as a, 26-year-old, kind of thrust into, okay, well, we need to arrange a funeral and we need to, finalize the details and even before the funeral part of the MDPOA, oh, that's not really in place, but maybe the person that was, dedicated to doing this, maybe they weren't comfortable doing it. So I say all that to say, it's good to just like you have an annual checkup at the doctor, just like metaphorically, you may go get your car tuned up. You see your therapist to have that mental checkup. You see your spiritual leader for that spiritual and soul checkup. It would be a good idea to review with your closest allies, maybe these are loved ones, maybe they're your friends, of around what do I want to happen, and communicate that. What do you want to happen to you when you are not able to speak for yourself? Like, what medical decisions do you want made? And here's the document with them on here. Here, person, whoever's going to carry them out, here it is. And that's something to review, maybe initially, at least annually, or when things change. And like, Lawrence said in the chat, we're going to share some stuff with you. So you don't have to totally have it figured out right now. But at the very least, the fact that you showed up today says a lot of good things. And it brings a lot of hope of, by having these conversations, just starting the conversation, it helps to destigmatize the fear of just having the conversation. And it gives families and loved ones and folks, it gives so much intention around choice and intention around how can you die well, like Gina said, and how can you do it with grace and with love, and it doesn't have to be as stressful and as hard for the practical pieces as it can be. It doesn't have to be.
Thank you. Covering so much, both for practitioners and community members, and recognizing that as practitioners, we are also members of the community, and recognize that we have our own grief stories, our own death stories that call us to this work in so many different ways. Wanted to give Gina and Lawrence a final chance to respond, if anything.
We're working the mute.
Awesome. So for me, I want to answer the question in two parts. The first, practically speaking, usually when we do funerals, we know the family or someone in the family, so it's not necessarily a cold kind of experience. However, there have been times where people will call the church because they don't have a church to do the funeral, or their home church for whatever reason won't do the funeral, and so they want to know if we will host it. And certainly the answer is always yes, at least in my context. And so having those kinds of conversations really beforehand with your parish, or if you're a member of a church, making sure that your pastor will honor, or that there's some record keeping of your wishes, so that if the pastor changes, that pastor will be able to honor your family's wishes and your wishes as well. And so having conversations with family members I just typically have those conversations in terms of when I first meet people as a pastor, explaining what a pastor is and what our role is. And so inevitably it comes up in that way. But it usually doesn't happen to go in depth until after a loved one has passed. And then my role really is more theological with the loved ones, answering questions about God, what happens after death, sometimes working through some question or issue they have their own faith that the death has sparked. And then inevitably there's some sort of family dynamic that's challenged or changed or disrupted. And so really helping to really have conversations about how loved ones can celebrate the life of their loved one and make the experience as positive and affirming for everyone as possible, because we all grieve differently and we bring different things into a space. And so when I especially think about a service, I think about ways we can celebrate and honor and lift up, but also give space for there to be tears and silence and prayers and sacred moments as well. And so conversations are really, really much of what I do. And it's important to just meet folks where they are. I'm not one of those pastors that will talk about hell and damnation and, all of that. I find that inappropriate. I've been to 2 funerals, actually. One that I planned, both of my parents died very young, and then my grandmother who raised me also died very suddenly. And so I had to plan a double funeral. I'm trans, and the pastor at the time actually publicly condemned not only me from the pulpit during the funeral, but also publicly condemned my father, who was laying in the casket in the front of the church during the funeral, because he didn't attend church often enough. So he wasn't sure if his soul was going. And I'm like, what? So I can't fathom being someone who brings up anything like that, that's judgmental, destructive, that would leave a family member or loved ones feeling like their loved one wasn't at rest. And so just really being careful about creating an experience that loved ones can think on and remember with fondness as they grieve and their loved one and celebrate the life of their loved one.
Lawrence, can I just say that's super fucked up? I'm really sorry that happened to you. Like, no, yeah, like piggybacking off of that, that's like a master class in what not to do, what that pastor did. Like, absolutely not. Yikes. Yeah. Ugh.
No, thanks for sharing that story, Lawrence. I think it highlights some of the exactly what Tory mentioned, what not to do and is caring for families and the end of life with folks. So now we want to give everyone an opportunity to really kind of follow through and ask individual panelists kind of your questions. So we are planning on going into breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will be themed, but also I think that our panelists are open to talking about whatever it is that comes to mind that you kind of have on your heart, especially in regards to our individual practices. So I'll let everyone kind of share what their their breakout rooms might be about, and then we'll open the breakout rooms, but then also give you a little bit of a break as well. So to come back and join the breakout room around 7 p.m. our time. So if you can start with Tory, maybe share a little bit about what you might discuss in your breakout room.
Yeah, my breakout room is nominally about issues around children. So, how to attend to families who are losing a child or have lost a child, or how to talk about death with children. But also, I'm also very happy to answer any questions that people might have that come up in especially if you're like interested in some of these more practical things that we touched on. If you have questions about how those things work, or really anything, it's, yeah, like I said, but yeah, nominally children. And I'm a parent, and my child has spent quite a bit of her young life in the hospital. She's not terminally ill, but she was born with a heart defect. And so I do have experience being like a parent in that hospital setting, as well as being a chaplain who attends to families. So there's that.
And what about Gina?
You might have to unmute her.
There we go. I got it. I think I'm unmuted, aren't I? Yes, you can hear me. Mine is kind of loosely around the topic of issues of death and dying for people who might not identify as Christian or maybe not even religious. Kind of a space we could talk about what that looks like, kind of the nuns or the spiritual not religious, or if you're a practitioner in interreligious care. Much like Tory, though, open to whatever questions folks want to bring. Before my current position, I was a hospice chaplain. And I think that we like to divide people up along these lines of these people are religious and these people aren't. And that's not true, as we all know. So even if you grew up Catholic, you still have a lot of questions about what to do when your loved one is dying or when you're facing your own death. So kind of a broad overview there.
And Lawrence.
Thank you. So I, like my colleagues, am also open to talking about whatever questions you might have. I will specifically be talking about death and end of life planning for LGBTQ folks specifically, or people who are perhaps wed to someone who's trans, specifically, or someone who's trans, because I know that LGB very different than T, and so spouses of trans or gender non-conforming folks, and then also LGBT folks, and the considerations that are made for end of life.
Great. And Nikki and I will be here in the main room. And Nikki, you want to share what we will be talking about?
Sure, yeah. Of course, in suit with the rest of our colleagues, whatever comes up, and more so of the kind of knowing what I know now, and invitation for Jessica and I to talk about, our ministerial experiences and, the things that we know now would have been helpful. And so just wanting to, share that with you, as well as, connect as well. And the cool thing about these breakouts is, guess what? You don't have to just select one and be there forever. You have full autonomy to pick and choose all the ones you want. So for some, that might be amazing. For others, that might be totally not amazing. And so that's why we have the main room, where for those I just don't want to choose, that's okay too. So both things are true. And the beautiful thing is, just trying to be as best we can, as inclusive and as meaningful for this time for you all. So that is what we'll be doing. So I guess from here, it is our pause. It's a bio break. It's a get reset. And then feel free to join the rooms.
And the rooms are open. We will be in the rooms for about 30 minutes or so, close, and then come back together. So as she mentioned, take a break, join the rooms when you're ready, and we will then come back.
So I might try to join again from my computer instead of being on my phone, fam, which is what I'm on. My computer would not work. My Zoom